You probably don't know, but I discuss the weekly text almost every week with a weekly preachers text study group that I've been a part of for a few years. This last year, we've been doing it all on Zoom. And this past week, one of them shared a story about having an arbor that was grew muscat grapes, had those muscat grapes vines growing all over this arbor. And he recalled one particular year when he aggressively pruned back those vines all the way back to where they clung to the arbor. He was afraid that he might have gone too far and was hurting the vine's chances to be productive that year. But to his surprise, those vines that year were the most prolific they had ever been. He ate as many grapes as he could, and the rest of it went into jars of jelly. Well, Jesus' disciples would have been familiar with the necessity to prune a grapevine's branches to increase the harvest. And by using this agricultural metaphor, Jesus communicates to us some important elements about our life and faith. First of all, the life of discipleship is an ongoing growth process that will continue to need tending up until the day we die. I recall one of my facilitators in a spiritual direction internship that I participated in. She was a nun and she was sharing about being the spiritual director for sisters in her community who were in their 80s and 90s. It was not uncommon, she said, for them to be processing events that had occurred in their childhood as they continued onward in their journeys towards healing and wholeness. The need for pruning in order to bear the fruits of love continue for a lifetime. And Jesus not only speaks of pruning, but also tells his disciples, you've already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. And there's an interesting play on words here in the Greek, as the word for prune, kathare, and the word for cleansed, katharoi, share a root, and you can hear they sound very similar. Pruning then is a cleansing, cathartic action, a healing. It's not violent or harsh. Jesus says that it's God's loving word that heals and prunes us. If it's judgmental in any way, then it's the loving judgment of a master gardener, artfully discerning what needs to be snipped away from our lives so that we might bear more fruit. And the more fruit we bear, the more our lives become filled with joy. And in our Wednesday midweek discussion of this text, we stumbled upon the idea that the process of forgiveness includes some pruning. For forgiveness is a process that can take many years. I remember when my son was about 13 years old, and he became very adamant about wearing name brand clothes to school in order to fit in. But I realized they were a little bit more expensive. But dealing with this as a father brought back to mind an incident that happened to me when I was about his age, 13. I remembered how it felt to want to be in style and fit in. And I realized that I still had some healing and forgiving to do from this incident that had happened years before in the 70s, when to be cool and to fit in meant having long hair. It was the summer between my 8th and 9th grade years in school, and my blonde hair at the time was almost down to my shoulders. After a lot of nagging from my mother, I finally agreed, well, I would go to the barber and have it trimmed so that it wouldn't look quite so unruly. Well, she dropped me off at the barber, went to do some errands, and I told him what I wanted. But instead of just the trim, he cut my hair very short. I had glasses at the time. When I put my glasses back on, I was furious. When my mom came to pick me up, I told her, don't pay him, and I'd never go back to that barber again. And I never did. And in dealing with my son's phase of needing to fit in, I realized 27 years later that I was still carrying a big load of pain and anger. It was time to let the vine dresser go to work. I imagined how that barber must have felt with his livelihood threatened by the hairstyles of the day. I sensed that his mistreatment of me probably had at its source some real fear and pain. And so I finally forgave him and let that branch of hurt that I'd carried so long be pruned away. And one of the fruits of that particular occasion was also a newfound patience with my son's desire to fit in and be seen as cool by his peers. And so I willingly bought him the popular brand name clothes, even if they were a bit more expensive. Well, that's an example of God pruning me as an individual. But I also wonder today about how God prunes whole communities of faith. The yous in this passage are plural yous. In a Southern dialect, we might translate it, I am the vine and y'all are the branches. So how might we need to be pruned together, not only as a faith community, but also as a whole North American society? What might we have to let go of and give up to best mitigate the climate crisis? What kind of pruning will turn us from a war economy and bring forth the fruits of a peaceful, abundant, and sustainable life for all the peoples on this earth? How might our vine dresser prune us this day to bear the fruits of love for all our neighbors as we emerge from this COVID-19 health pandemic? Once pruned, branches only really need to do one thing in order to bear fruit. 8 times in 4 verses, Jesus speaks about abiding, staying connected. We, the branches, must stay connected to Christ the vine in order to bear the fruits of God's love. Jesus says, abide in the vine and let his life-giving word abide in us. This abiding allows the love of God to flow through us, just like the miracle of life flows through a branch so that it might bear more fruit. God's love cannot come to fruition unless we, the branches, abide in the vine. Another way of saying this is simply God's work and our hands. When we're connected to the vine, God's love flows through everything we do. When we're connected to the vine, we also have the freedom to ask for whatever we wish, because it will be in line with God's love for us and for this world. This connection to Christ the vine becomes the source of everything we do. And it's not just our connecting to the vine, but also the vine's connecting to us. Hear Jesus say again, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, Jesus says, you can do nothing. But just imagine the infinite, creative, fruitful possibilities that can flow through us, because the life source of the vine flows through our lives. In this Easter season, the vine dresser continues to crop off our unproductive branches with death and resurrection pruning shears. The Father snips off whatever is dead and decaying so that the new resurrected life of the vine might flow through us. As we remain secure and connected to the vine, God's love flows through us, bringing forth the fruits of justice, peace, and abundant life into the world. So let's welcome the vine dresser's pruning shears. Let's abide in the vine and let the the vine abide in us. And let's discover together how much fruit God's vineyard can bear. I won't be surprised if at some point we'll be inclined to say, why, it's time to make some jelly. Amen.